Good afternoon. Let me try that one more time. Good afternoon. All right. It's great seeing you and welcome to the 40th anniversary, the 40th Congressional Black Caucus Conference. It has been a long road, but we need you and the caucus more than ever today. And what we're here, and I'm glad to see so many of you here to talk about wealth at this brain trust. Because we know that the financial crisis that struck America and the world has actually been the most severe since the Great Depression. This Great Recession has wiped out at least a decade of economic gains for the nation, a generation of gains for some, especially the black community, which suffers twice the unemployment rate of the rest of the population. Furthermore, the income gap between the bottom fifth and the top fifth of our population has widened significantly. A recent study by the Congressional Budget Office showed that the average gain for those in the top fifth income distribution had gained an average of $740,900 relative to the 1979 average. By contrast, the bottom fifth had lost $6,900. This is a problem that afflicts not only the poor, but all people of color who have lost out on opportunities of the past 3 decades and is leading to distortions within our society. Marginalized communities, by definition, are more vulnerable and experience economic swings in a manner that is amplified relative to the rest of the population. There is less room for error and often stretch their resources and time to the limit so that any shock quickly dominoes their lives. In the crises, though, there lies opportunity. And I'm sure that other panelists have or will use this expression. Because anytime, you can get some good out of bad, you try to make sure the crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We've heard all of those things. We'll hear them again because they're cliche, but they're also true. But to seize on these opportunities, people must be ready and equipped with the financial resources, intellectual capacity, and the network to seize on these opportunities. And one of the things that we tried to do in the Congressional Black Caucus, and I know that my colleague Maxine Waters had a brain trust on this morning, and what we've got 10 of us that sit on the Financial Services Committee. And when we were going through the Financial Reg Reform Bill, we decided there had to be some things included in the bill, not something that you would publicize, not something that you go and try to put a press release on, because that's the way, actually, when you do those things, they try to stop them in its tracks. Things that we negotiated behind the scenes to make sure that we begin to, as we get out of this recession, that we make sure that African Americans and other minorities are able to participate. And so we have in the bill where each and every one of the governmental agencies, whether you're talking about the Treasury or FDIC and others, who historically had not done business with people of color, now the law says they must do business. They must put people in there. And that's the kind of activities that can help create opportunities. Unfortunately, very few minority firms are ready to seize opportunities and are thus unlikely to capture the opportunities on the way up, despite losing much on the way down. We are lucky today to have on this panel a few of the minority investors who have built up investment firms with the capacity, access to capital, and human capital necessary to compete with any firm, no matter where they are, with all of the elite firms, compete with them for their best and for the most complex deals there is. It is critical for government to promote the emergence of minority and women-owned asset management firms, not just because it is the right thing to do to create equal opportunities, but because the crises may actually yield a further concentration of risk, and even greater systemic risk in the future as many firms are wiped out from the competitive landscape. Systemic risk arises from size, leverage, and interconnectedness. The disappearance of many firms as a result of the financial crisis has actually and probably increased the concentration of the financial industry, so that systemic risk may in fact be higher today than even before the crises. But this concentration also includes the lack of appropriate diversity among players. Mitigating the problem of systemic risk, concentration of risk will require increasing opportunities for emerging fund managers of all types, including minority and women-owned fund managers. A path to learn, gain experience, build a track record, and grow must be clearly available. And firms that remain labeled as emerging into perpetuity point to continuing barriers to access that must be tackled from a regulatory point of view and by the industry itself. I've assembled for you today an all-star panel. An all-star panel because it blends a lot of the expertise and intellectual gravities that I alluded to earlier, and remarking that small firms need to fill a void in the marketplace to prevent the building of systemic risks, but they do not exist in a vacuum. Utilizing government programs will enable them to advance public policy goals while building a base upon which minorities can prosper. The goal of those of us who serve in the public sector is to ensure that those individuals who saw a generation's worth of gains wiped out from the catastrophic collapse of 2008 are not now left out of the recovery. Last year, with, as I said, my colleague Maxine Waters and the other 9 CBC members who sit on the Financial Services Committee, we passed the bills that included minority participation. And over the past several years, I've worked closely with Treasury and the FDIC to evaluate the inclusiveness of their programs and to seek opportunities for emerging asset managers. To their credit, they recognize the problem and have been working with us constructively to seek out innovative solutions while still fulfilling their mission for the taxpayers. But we've got to continue to push them and nudge them and to make sure those doors stay wide open. Our panel, starting with our esteemed moderator, Michael Campbell, includes entrepreneurs and prominent government officials who have experience in the financial services sector and can discuss with our audience, utilizing firsthand knowledge, their solutions to the pressing issues. Let me just end on this before I bring up our moderator. I didn't introduce myself when I came in. I'm Congressman Gregory Meeks from Queens, New York, southeastern Queens. And I wanted to say 12 years ago, and I just ran into my predecessor when I was walking in here. That's another reason I was a few minutes late as we was talking. 12 years ago when I ran for office, you know, when you look at southeastern Queens, people talk about it as one of the highest median incomes of all black communities in the country. They talk about us, they talk about Prince George's County. But yet, when you talk about wealth, as you see it in other communities, it's not there. And so when we ran, we talked about that the second phase of the civil rights movement. And people talk about, and we hear it always talk about the civil rights movement. But you can't stay in one phase of the civil rights movement. The second phase of the civil rights movement is about economics. It's about money. You see, because when we talk civil rights, oftentimes people talk about freedom. Well, let me tell you, you're not free if you don't have any money.
All right.
And so we talked about moving to the second phase, and that's about economics, and we can't be afraid to talk about money and creating wealth. And we can't be knocking someone who is making money. For example, this is, and it's not going to change, a capitalist system. So if you want to go to another system, you need to leave here because it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to change. What we need to do is to figure out how we master it. And an individual that I know that have mastered it and is successful is the individual that I'm going to bring up right now. Michael Campbell. Check out Michael Campbell. Michael is the founder and the managing partner of his own Fannie Capital LLC. Now, when you look at his track record, he started out with Kenneth Leventhal Company, now Ernst & Young. He worked for J.P. Morgan. He also worked with, was a partner with T.S. Quinn Associates. He worked with UBS. And when he was with UBS, he was responsible for multi-billion-dollar real estate portfolio of direct and indirect investments, including developing strategy and managing operating partners using various equity, debt, and hybrid structures to meet investment objectives across all major property types. And then he did his own thing. So he went on up till he created his own fund, understanding what it is, and that's what this thing is really about. Get those experiences, build up, and then you're able to create and do what you have. That's Michael Campbell, and that's why we chose him to be the moderator of this panel and to bring the information forward to you. So without further ado, let me present to you an individual who I lean on heavily. You know, sometimes in this business when, you know, we on these phones, you got to call somebody and you say, help me out. What do you think about this bill? What do you think about that bill? I call on Michael Campbell, and I call on him now to be the moderator of this panel. Welcome, please, Mr. Michael L. Campbell.
That's a tough act to follow, let me tell you. Good morning, or excuse me, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming today. We'd like to thank our host, Representative Meeks, for his usual hospitality and fine words, and the rest of the organizers of this outstanding 40th annual legislative conference sponsored by the CBC Foundation. The focus of today's discussion will be on opportunities for minority wealth creation. I think the best way to start is with introductions from each of the panelists, starting with Neela and then working down the line. I think each panelist should take a couple minutes to introduce themselves, say a few words, and try not to take all of my questions out of play while you're doing that, please.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear? Can everyone hear? First off, let me thank Congressman Meeks, whose continued leadership in financial services and other asset classes is enormously important in terms of developing, our community in a stronger way, and particularly in the financial sector. So thank you, Congressman Meeks. My name is Neela Youngblood. I'm founding partner of Pharos Capital, which is a private equity firm focused on providing growth and expansion capital and buyouts for companies in healthcare, business services, and opportunistic investments. We've been in business since 1998. We've raised 3 funds, started small in 98, 30 million, then 155 million in 2000, 400 million in 2005, and we're in the process of raising 600 million right now. I'm also on the board of Starwood Hotels, The Gap, Burger King, which we just sold, and Energy Future Holding, which is a buyout, $45 billion buyout. Thanks.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the Honorable Gregory Meeks. My name is Lori Jones Gibbs, and I work with Genworth Financial Services. Genworth Financial is a company that believes that wealth is why we exist. We simply say we can put you in your home with as little as 5% to 3% down payment. We can help you sleep with peace of mind by providing you with the right insurance policy so that your family can go on if you should leave them early. But our biggest sell is we can help you have a check that outlives you. And we do that through our long-term care and retirement division. I'll be happy to share some stories with you and answers and questions down the road. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Congressman Meeks. We appreciate your leadership in this area, and on behalf of Treasury, we appreciate the collaborative nature of our efforts together on a wide range of issues, but in particular on the small business legislation that was passed by the House a few months ago, and we had Senate passage just yesterday. So we appreciate your leadership in that arena. And I also want to say, as a native Clevelander, we actually share something in common. That basketball player who ended up going to Miami didn't end up in either of our cities. So, but just a brief background about myself. I'm Don Graves. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Treasury Department. I handle issues related to small business, housing, community development, a few small issues right now. I am an attorney by training, spent a few years as the token Democrat at the Business Roundtable, and before that it was also at Treasury during the Clinton administration.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Congressman Meeks, for allowing the FDIC to have the opportunity to be here. My name is Sandra Thompson, and I am the Director of Bank Supervision and Consumer Protection for the FDIC. And we supervise and examine banks around the country. I've got a workforce that is in 6 regional offices and 84 territories. And we go in and conduct examinations to make sure that banks are operating in a safe and sound condition and that they are protecting consumers. Prior to me serving as the Director of Supervision, I served as the Director of Securitization for the Resolution Trust Corporation, where we issued and sold over $41 billion in mortgage-backed securities. And I'm pleased to say that we had the first all-minority deal where minorities were lead and co-leads on transactions, so we know that that type of work can be done. And prior to that, I served as an associate at Goldman Sachs in New York City.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman, for inviting us here. I know you've been vigilant about this issue, and I'm really privileged to be on this esteemed panel. I've had a chance to work with Sandra, and I think we're all very lucky to have her in her role at the FDIC. I know this because we recently closed a deal with the FDIC, so I've started to work intimately with them. My name is Don Cogswell. And I'd be remiss without saying I actually participated last year in a panel which sort of, we talked about the same issues, so it'd be interesting to benchmark where we were last year to this year and each year as we move through this crisis. And that was chaired by Congresswoman Waters. Donna Sims Wilson was on that panel as well. I thought a lot of great points, but I'm looking forward to sort of bringing forward further points. But I'm Don Cogswell. I run the Cogswell Group, which is a real estate private equity firm. My background, I was a professional soccer player years ago. I was a lawyer at SCAD and a banker at Merrill Lynch, had a boutique investment banking firm, and started this private equity firm to go out and invest in real estate around the nation.
Okay, thank you very much. Given the very varied acumen we have among our panelists up here, I thought that we'd divide this up into 3 distinct components, which will naturally flow as we ask questions of the panelists. The first will be wealth creation at the individual's level. The second will be wealth creation for small businesses, and the final category will be in wealth creation within the context of investment management, so that we can see sort of a logical progression. We'll try to get through that in 30 minutes or so. I think we have some time constraints with Don in particular, so that he can get back to do the very important work of the United States Treasury. And so we'll try to open it up for questions just before then. Okay? So the individual, Laurie. There are many avenues to creating wealth, and we may spend a good deal of time this afternoon on discussing small business and investment management, but I wanted to start with perhaps an overlooked first step to wealth creation for the individual, and that involves home ownership, which is near and dear to your heart at Genworth. We know that you are focused on developing strategies to increase home ownership for low and moderate income ethnic minority constituencies. What strategies have you seen work the best for achieving that goal? And given how much the landscape has changed over the past 2-3 years during this little correction we've gone through, what new initiatives do you see in the pipeline that look promising for achieving that goal?
Thank you for the question. First, individual wealth. Let me address that holistically. Wealth is basically created through inheritance, real estate ownership, business ownership. Those are the three top ways people generally create wealth. Someone left you something. You began real estate. If you look at the history of African Americans, most of our wealth started with land and real estate. And our family passed it on and on. Recently, we have seen the studies. We have seen the downturn. We know what has happened in the real estate market. Let me share with you, though, a couple of pointers so then I can answer his questions. According to the Center for Responsible Lending, by the time the foreclosure crisis is over, African Americans would have lost $200 billion of equity. If our wealth creation has been tied to equity and we are losing our homes, I challenge us to become knowledgeable about what it is we need to know. Because when we know better, we do better. So what do we need to know? We need to understand what legislation is out there that can impact home ownership, be it for the positive or the negative. But we also must believe, first and foremost, that we can do it. And we must take advantage of this market. The house that you could not afford 2 years ago, you can probably get anywhere from 50% to 70%. Take advantage of it, but you don't have to do it by yourself. I'm going to share with you a story of black investors in Durham, North Carolina, and how they are taking advantage of the housing market at this time and place. These investors came together in the late 1990s, and they went to an organization called the North Carolina Institute for Minority Economic Development. There were two doctors. They said they wanted to find like-minded blacks to invest in Durham, North Carolina. They had three basic functions that they wanted to focus on. They wanted to take advantage of the housing market. They wanted to help train and educate the next group of upcoming blacks. And they also wanted to make sure that they were profitable. There's nothing wrong with profit. As the congressman said, we live in a capitalistic society. So what have they done? They have loaned money to up-and-coming black businesses. The first question I'm generally asked is, well, have they lost any? Have some lates, but everyone is paid. They are in the position right now of getting ready to own 30% of the revitalized downtown Durham, North Carolina. They wrote an exclusive deal with the developer that says they have first right of refusal for any opportunity that comes to downtown Durham. 8 years ago, there was nothing that happened in downtown Durham after 5 p.m. What you need to understand about Durham, North Carolina, it was known as the Black Wall Street. So these black investors are trying to return it back to the Black Wall Street. Their third option is they went to North Carolina Central University, Duke University, and Chapel Hill, because those are the universities that surround Durham. And they looked for the young black professionals who were in law school, who were going to pursue their PhDs. And they started to invite these youngsters to their monthly meetings. And they allowed them to buy a share or two within their investment club. They have been so successful that they now have started 2 additional investment clubs. I share this with you because I believe we have to get back to the local economics. This investment club started with just $250,000. They have grown now to several million, but more importantly, it's the wealth that they've created through capitalizing and reinvesting in their own communities. So when I think about home ownership, I think about it as the individual family that needs to buy a home, but I also think about collective economics, where you can start buying major and negotiate with major real estate transactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I know that issues of affordable housing and foreclosure prevention are topics that you like to discuss as well. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to add anything to that.
No, I'm happy to. I think you can't talk about the economy and the challenges that we have without talking about the foreclosure crisis. And I think a lot of people have homes, and we should probably, from my perspective, be focusing on home retention. The regulators have issued guidance encouraging banks to work with individuals and also with borrowers on loan modifications and restructuring loans so that people can stay in their homes, so that communities will not be as heavily impacted as they normally would be in a high foreclosure situation. And we have to get really aggressive and serious with regard to ensuring that the financial institutions that are responsible for making these loan modifications are actually putting people in loans that they understand and loans that they can afford. And these loan modifications, I think, are critical because the home is the largest asset that many people own, and having an affordable home mortgage is just absolutely crucial to the community. I'd also be remiss, the FDIC recently conducted a survey in conjunction with the U.S. Census, and one of the survey results noted that 54% of African Americans were either unbanked or underbanked. Unbanked means they don't have a bank account at all, and underbanked means they have a bank account, but they utilize alternative financial services such as payday loans and refund anticipation loans. And I didn't mention this in my introduction, but I'm from the south side of Chicago, and between the time I leave the airport in Midway and drive to my parents, there are more payday lenders and check cashers and money exchangers and title loan companies than there are banks. And so I think there are some general issues that we need to address in terms of financial literacy. That's another conversation, but it all plays into the same venue, because if you don't understand some of the financial transactions, they can be very complicated, and you can end up with a loan you don't understand and loans you can't afford. So I think that foreclosure retention, making sure that we're very intentional about loan restructures and loan modifications, I think that's critical to us moving forward and out of this foreclosure crisis.
Thank you, Lori. I want to come back to you for a second and let you follow up on that. But as you do, remember, we're thinking from an investor's mindset here as well. And so how can we do good and do well from, I don't want to steal your line. Just for the record, Lori and I came up with the same line independently. But how can we do good and do well during the process of working our way out of this little debacle that we have now in housing? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, first I want to recognize two of my colleagues who happen to be here, because the next comment really piggybacks on what we're doing at Genworth to help preserve home ownership within the black community, which I think then allows us to do investor. First, I'd like to ask Marcy Presbury, who covers and protects. She helps keep people in homes. Marcy, would you please stand up? And then I'd like to ask Mr. Kenny Turner, who works in our capital markets. So he's one of the really smart guys who run the numbers. I'm just like the mouthpiece. They hang out with me, okay? But one of the things that Genworth has done, especially under Marcy's leadership, is last year when we looked at foreclosure, because we knew that this was going to be a big crisis. And we are a mortgage insurance company. So let me put that out there, the division that we work for. So it is very important for us to make sure we help keep people in their homes. If we don't keep people in their homes, guess who pays the claim? We do. So it's good to do it, but it's also a good business practice to make sure we do it. What we were able to do last year alone is save over 20,000 families. Of those 20,000 families, 6% of them were African-American families. But listen to this. That totaled $2.6 billion of home equity that was saved just for those 20,000 families. As we think about investing, some of the things that we're looking at, when you look at real estate, it is still the cornerstone of wealth creation. You still start your business with the equity. Now, equity will not grow as rapidly as it did in the last 5 years. We will get back, and I believe Mr. Kim will agree with me, that we will get back to the 2% annual increments of appreciation. But when you want to invest, you must invest in yourselves. You must invest in your children. You must invest in our youth. How do we do that? Simply. We first must be honest with ourselves and make sure our credit is right and our money is right. This is nothing new to us. I come over here and I see the young brother, and I want to make this comment. All of you know an artist named Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye had a song out called What's Happening, Brother? And he stated back in the early 70s, and I'm sure the congressman can recall this with me, is can't find no work, can't find no job, my friend. Money is tighter than it has ever been. And tell me, friend, how in the world have you been? What's happening, brother? Well, this crisis, I say to you all, is an opportunity for us. Those of us who don't have our money right, we need to work to get it right so we can take advantage of the investment opportunities. We are buying up Durham. We should be buying up Baltimore. We should be buying up Chicago. But if our money is funny, we can't invest. We can only invest. I work in financial services. Let me give it clear to you. 2 years ago, if 50 was 40, if 50 was the new 40, well, right now in the credit services, 740 is the new 680. If you want the best possible deal when you invest, you better have the best possible credit. Now, you can get deals out there, but the best deal is making sure you're using other people's money for your deal.
You went poetic on us. That was nice. Okay, let's shift gears, move on to small business here, and put Mr. Graves on the spot. Don, as you manage, just reciting a little bit, give people the background from your bio, portfolio of policy issues, or you're responsible for managing a portfolio of policy issues, including business and small business finance and development, housing finance policy, community and economic development, capital access, job creation, and issues related to underserved and minority communities. A little bit of experience with 3P initiatives, which stands for public-private partnership initiatives. So with that in mind, the following two questions. I'll start with one, I'll go to the second one after you answer the first. As you seek to address policy issues related to small business development, economic and community development, and underserved and minority communities, what are the Treasury's major concerns across those areas, and what priorities have you outlined to address those concerns?
Thank you. Let me start by I'm risking something here by telling a little joke.
We've had poetry. We can go with jokes.
Now comedy hour. So a duck walks into a federal government agency, and the duck happens to be from Queens, but it doesn't really matter. So the duck walks in and says to the bureaucrat sitting behind the desk, "Got any duck food?" And the bureaucrat says, "You know, I work for the federal government. We don't do duck food. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave." So the duck walks away, comes back the next day, says, "Got any duck food?" The bureaucrat says, "No, I'm an important government official. I have things to do. I can't waste my time with you. I'm sorry. We don't have any duck food." Third day, the duck comes back, says, "Got any duck food?" And the bureaucrat says, "Listen, I told you before, I am an important official with the federal government. I do important things. I don't have time to deal with you. So if you come back again, I'm going to nail your feet to the floor." So the duck scurries away. Duck comes back the fourth day, and the bureaucrat, shaking his head and doesn't know what he's going to do. And the duck says, "Got any nails?" And the bureaucrat says, "No." And the duck says, "Got any duck food?" So if we think about the duck as any one of us who's coming to the federal government for help, and I don't mean a handout, I mean a hand up, an opportunity, and the like. Too often, particularly in the last several years, we've been turned away. There have not been opportunities to do a wide range of things. We've just talked about housing and the foreclosure mess we're in. We've talked about the economy and the problems that we're facing all across the country, the lack of jobs. Let me say that on behalf of Secretary Geithner and the President, we understand what people are going through. And this is not a government bureaucrat who says, go away, come, and don't come bother me. In fact, we want you to come to us and talk with us and work with us to figure out a way for all of us out of this mess. Just to backtrack a little bit on some of the things that were just covered, there are a number of efforts that we've undertaken since the beginning of the administration to deal with some of the issues that we're facing around the country. We have our Making Home Affordable program, which we've already seen has helped more than, well, nearly 1.5 million families stay in their home through loan modification programs. We have a wide range of other programs through our Financial Literacy Council, through our financial access initiatives at the Treasury Department. Our Bank On program, which we're hoping that the Congressman and his colleagues will help us get funded, will help everyday Americans, particularly in low and moderate income communities, get access to mainstream financial products and services, not having to go to the check cashers and the other companies along those lines. We have the CDFI Fund, the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, which provides support for the institutions that are working directly in all of our communities around the country, getting at the support for small businesses, for low-income borrowers, moderate-income borrowers. We provided $80 million in awards to those financial institutions, and we've provided more than $3.5 billion in tax credits through that program. Now, getting specifically to the small business piece, clearly there's an issue right now. You can't solve the foreclosure problem and the housing problems without jobs. That's the critical component to this. We can't get around the unemployment that we're facing. We can't get around the lack of wealth creation in this country without dealing with it head on. As I mentioned earlier, just yesterday the Senate passed a set of initiatives, part of the Small Business Jobs Bill, two of which are going to be run out of the Treasury Department. There's a $30 billion small business lending fund. You know, you've heard a lot about the TARP program, the Toxic Asset Relief Program. You've heard about our programs to help stabilize the financial sector. Well, this program is directed, taking $30 billion and directly supporting the banks, the Main Street banks in our communities, the minority-owned banks in our communities, the CDFIs in our communities, to provide access to credit for small businesses. We expect that that will create hundreds of millions of dollars of support for small businesses. Another part of that program is the State Small Business Credit Initiative. It's a $1.5 billion program that helps innovative state programs around the country to provide access to credit for small businesses. And these are the businesses that can't get credit elsewhere. These are not the businesses that can go out and get any sort of loan. These are businesses that are doing well, had been doing well, hit the recession, have had some problems. Maybe the owner's credit's taken a hit. Maybe they haven't had the types of revenues that they'd had in the past. This program will specifically go to help those businesses get access to credit so that they can create new wealth, create jobs, and get the economy going again.
I'm sorry, Don, and that is through Main Street banks, the small banks, their local banks.
That's through the local banks. It's not the largest banks in the country, but it's through your community banks, as I said, the minority-owned banks, the CDFIs, your local banks. And I'm going to cover two other small things while I have the floor.
We can come back to you, too. It's all right.
I appreciate that. The Congressman mentioned that we have this new opportunity through the Wall Street legislation that was passed. Through the Congressman's leadership and his colleagues in the caucus, we were able to get the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. That will do a huge amount, and I can't overstate how much that will do to ensure that that small businesses, that minority and women get access to opportunities at all of our government agencies. Let me end with this part just by saying that we also understand that there are a huge number of opportunities that are not being invested in right now because the investors have gone away, and particularly in our underserved communities, our emerging domestic markets, if you will. the Treasury Department, with our partners from around the government, are looking at ways that we can change our own policies and also find pots of money so that we can increase investment in emerging markets, in underserved markets, in small businesses, working with emerging managers and the like. So we are committed to supporting small businesses and supporting underserved communities around the country.
Some in the room may be familiar with this statistic, but I think it is 50% of all investment in minority communities happens through minority investors. And so that last little piece there that you mentioned is pretty critical and good to hear. If you could, the PPIP that you launched 18 months ago now, it's been a little bit, yeah, 18 months ago now, was pretty cutting edge at the time, and Treasury managed to I guess, be the first within federal government to, at least through this last little bit of distress, launch such a program. Could you talk about a little bit about what you did for background and then how it's going, and where do you see those types of partnerships in the future, if at all, given that we seem to be maybe turning a little bit of a corner here, or at least into the next stage of the recovery?
Well, let me say that I am not the expert on our financial stability programs.
We'll take what we can get. You're here. Come on.
But I will tell you that 18 or so months ago, we were up against the wall as a country. We were facing the utter collapse of our financial sector and global financial markets. We created a number of programs at Treasury to support the financial markets. One of those programs was engaging money managers around the country to keep the financial sector moving again. And I'm going to get right to the core of this. At that time, we understood that it was crucial to engage managers from all sectors of our country, not just the big girls and boys who you hear about in Wall Street. We've engaged 10 asset managers over the last 2 years. Of the 10, 8 are small or minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses, and 6 of them are just minority and women-owned. Those 8, and I'll just run through those quickly. Piedmont Investments, African-American-owned. Avondale Investments, Native American-owned. Bell Rock Capital, woman-owned. Lombardia Capital Partners, Hispanic-owned. Paradigm Asset Management, African-American-owned. Earnest Partners, African-American-owned. So there's a commitment by this Treasury to engage firms that have historically been left out. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my colleague and have her stand up, Teresa Lewis, who is the head of our Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. It's through her work that we've been able to get where we are. We're at 24% minority utilization at the Treasury Department this year. That's $265 million going to minority-owned businesses. Clearly, that's not where we need to be, but that's a whole lot better than we were in the past.
And the structures that are in place, because oftentimes, and just correct me if I'm off on this, but oftentimes those are ventures with larger majority-owned firms. But these minority-owned firms have actual equity in what they are.
Direct participation with the federal government. That's correct.
Got it. And where do you see that going now that we've kind of moved to the next?
I think you're going to continue to see...
those types of ventures. Go ahead.
I think you're going to continue to see those types of ventures, again, through Teresa's leadership and the rest of the staff at Treasury. We'll continue to see that growth for those types of engagements. As I mentioned, we have these 2 new initiatives, the Small Business Lending Fund and the State Small Business Credit Initiative, a $30 billion program and a $1.5 billion program, or maybe $2 billion if the congressman takes us back to the House version of the legislation. Those programs are opportunities for us to engage firms directly outside of the government, and I think that we strongly believe that we're going to find ways to expand the work that we've already done.
Okay. Thank you. Now, as a segue into sort of the next phase of this, and this is getting into some of the larger companies now, investment management, we're going to put Mr. Cogswell on the spot here. So Don has, I guess, long time ago was a small business, and now he's actually a more established business. We can't call you a small business anymore, sorry. But having graduated from those ranks, just give us, you know, the one thing that you did that you really wish you hadn't done as a small business that really set you back or delayed your growth or delayed your strategy, whatever it is, that one thing that just annoyed the heck out of you. And then, of course, the opposite of that would be the good thing that you did that you wish you'd done earlier, maybe.
We're still a small business. I started this particular firm only 4 years ago. I actually started it actually.
Trying to give you some credit.
I appreciate that. I started the business really watching my father do community development in Harlem and trying to build up, you know, Harlem. So I saw it really through vicariously and through osmosis. And one of the things I thought that was important as people like my father and people here in Congress laid the groundwork for people like me to come around and you, Michael, to come around, was to actually go out and participate in the capital market system. So that really was my foundation to get out there. I think, you know, on the spot to think about one of the things I wish I would have thought about differently was, you know, picking partners. One of the things that I've had to really grapple with as I grow the business, especially in this particular crisis, is that there's enormous opportunity, but that's going to take us enormous amounts of capital. So I've had to go out and be judicious about who my partners are, and sometimes you find good partners and bad partners. And I found a few partners that weren't so good, and but it's part of the evolutionary process. And I think where we're ultimately trying to get to, and maybe where Neelan is sort of on this panel, sort of the mature part of the curve, is where you're really controlling capital from, as Congressman Meeks says, from the emerging manager to the real mature manager, and you're actually making true investment decisions and picking your partners. So
I'm just going to step out of the moderator's role for a second here and just echo that point. Picking partners, you can waste a lot of time picking partners. And I think I'm even younger than, my little fledgling firm is even younger than yours, and it has been an interesting ride. Moving on, though, you're the real estate professional on the panel here, and we've heard the commentary about how important real estate is to wealth creation in our community. What's the way back to recovery for the real estate sector, and how can we as minorities position ourselves to profit from that? So again, it's a little bit about where we are in the sector and then what the opportunities are.
I mean, I think I said it last year and I'll say it this year. I think we're fairly early, and this is a unique opportunity for investment firms to actually engage as we rebuild our country. And a lot of the rebuilding is going to be happening in urban communities, and I think the population growth is largely minority, so there's a real opportunity for minority firms to participate and add value. I know I've been involved in several consortiums that are looking at large pools of assets, and I know distressed assets, and I know it's critical for them to actually get my vantage point, my firm's vantage point about how, number one, to analyze these distressed assets and loans, and then how to manage these through to where we're getting to a more stabilized point. Where we are right now is sort of at a point that in my lifetime I've never seen, and where there's a unique opportunity. Just to put it in perspective, I mean, the scale of the current real estate crisis is so large that federal government has to play a central role. From 2003 to 2007, I believe the value of the real estate in the United States rose from $13 trillion and borrowed an additional $5 trillion in mortgages against the illusion of value. Today, the value of real estate has fallen back to 2003 levels, but the additional mortgage debt remains. So most properties built or bought between those periods of 2005 and 7 are now worth less than their mortgages. As these mortgages come due, lenders will be forced to liquidate, and real estate assets will trade at attractive prices, providing enormous opportunities to generate wealth. And sort of even going further, as of June, there was $256 billion of non-performing loans at the nation's banks, $437 billion, this is non-performing, at Fannie and Freddie, And in response, as we all know, the federal government placed Fannie and Freddie into conservatorship. And the FDIC has seized over 1,000 banks. My view is that the federal government will sell over $500 billion in real estate assets, the largest transfer of ownership in the nation's history. So there's a unique opportunity. It's an opportunity to get into distressed real estate, and it's unique.
I would just add to that that people sometimes forget that we are probably, a third of the way through this, maybe a little closer to half. But we got a long way to go, because if you assume the peak of the cycle was sometime early 2007, and the typical commercial real estate loan is at least 5 years long, then that's 2012 before you get the worst of the batch. And it's going to extend for another couple years beyond that as these, what are called maturity defaults, continue through the system, through these banks. So Don mentioned what's in the system now. If you look out another 4 or 5 years, that number is well over $1 trillion. So keep that in mind in terms of trying to quantify what the opportunity really is. Sorry, back to being moderator, my bad.
That's good.
Very good.
Well, thank you. Don, back to you. We know you've had some recent success in pursuing FDIC auctions. And as an investor now, what are the most important differences between transactions executed in the private sector and those executed with public sector involvement? Because we as investment managers always have to be cognizant of what our investors, our LPs, are thinking. So once you made that, once you started down that track of public access, what did you run into?
I mean, what I've found, and I've had, many investors, co-investors. I mean, I did a large deal in Brooklyn, New York, where I had Prudential. I've had some of the largest investors actually back some of the deals that I'm looking at. I'm not really sure that any of the investors had any other motive other than to making money, frankly. I have another motive, and I'm bringing another motive and feeling like, we did a deal sort of actually near Queens, near Congressman's district, where we actually won the RFP. It was 600 or 700, it was about $1 billion, largest federally subsidized housing complex in the country. And I looked at that transaction differently than any of the other groups who were looking at it, which they didn't have to look any differently over the preceding 10 years, which is they were going to stroke a very big check and pay for that property and take it. Whereas I saw it as an opportunity where it was highly subsidized, the government was going to be involved, there were local stakeholders who lived in this, and I partnered up with the local stakeholders, and we created a consortium and came up with a $100 million a bigger bid than the next highest bid, because I think we were looking at it in conjunction and partnership with government, where the government had a fiduciary responsibility in their view to the, through their elected officials and through some of the subsidies they had put into from taxpayer money. And I was able to sort of eke out a commercial return for my investors and also, do something that was positive for the local government. I think as we're looking towards the federal, sort of the FDIC, so you extrapolate that and you look at the, what's happening on a federal level or at the FDIC. The FDIC has done a tremendous job of, so these banks are failing, they're structuring loans, and they're going out and they're saying, we want to sell these and we need to make sure we're hitting the deposit insurance fund as little as possible. But having said that, we want to make sure that we're doing some things that aren't going to be, so catastrophic to local communities where we believe you may be in control of. So for instance, in one of the deals I looked at was in South Florida. I think the concern was if we allow the investor to buy these assets and they control a big portion of South Florida, they may go out and actually dump these onto the market and actually hurt the local economy. The answer from the FDIC was structural in nature and saying, we're going to partner with you and we're also going to put in some structural prohibitions for you not to be able to sell in a certain period of time so as not to affect the local economy. I mean, I can go on and on about these types of things that governments look to that typically is not the case if you're just buying straight from another private buyer, which ultimately, in our case, and I think in a lot of the cases of some of my colleagues, puts us in a better position because I have a better understanding of where, what those fiduciary responsibilities might be.
So you're basically stepping into, and Sandra, you should comment on this as well, but the most important difference is you're stepping into a pre-baked structure where you're going to have a partner, and then given the structure that's imposed on you, you price the deal accordingly as opposed to just trying to find a market clearing price that you would prefer. Is that kind of something that's fair? I mean, Sandra, do you want to comment on that as the...
I guess I'd like to make a point of clarification. FDIC hadn't seized 1,000 banks. Since the crisis in 2008, there's been 25 bank failures. Last year, there were 140. And so far this year, there's been 119 banks that have failed. And, it's interesting because most people know the FDIC because we insure deposits, but we do manage and sell assets from failed institutions. And right now, we've got about $37 billion in receivership assets, and we've sold over $560 billion since the crisis began in 2008. We do use a number of strategies to sell these assets, and we've been very successful in our bulk sale and our structured transactions, but these are typically purchased by large investors, and they require large capital requirements. And so we've received a lot of feedback from small investors who would like to participate in our process. So we've hosted outreach events around the country, and they've been specifically targeting smaller investors and teaching how to do business with the FDIC if you're a contractor or an investor. But some of the feedback we've received based on these outreach sessions, we've made some changes to our asset sales process. In fact, we recently issued a notice on FDIC's plans to issue smaller and more geographically focused asset pools to help increase the diversity of some of the bidders. And we're planning to start offering those small geographically focused pools in the fourth quarter of this year. And we just hope that more people will have the opportunity to participate. I know that in the last crisis at the RTC, and we got some really good execution because more people participated, more bidders, and the capital requirements were a lot less on some of the smaller transactions. So we're just hoping that when we start our offerings in the fourth quarter of this year, that we will get a lot of participation. I should note that you have to, if you want to bid on FDIC pools, you have to go through a pre-qualification process, and you have to fill out a bidder or purchaser eligibility form, and it requires you to do things like you couldn't have caused a loss to a depository institution, but all this information is on our website. I think it's also important to note that in addition to the asset sales, asset management, as these loans need special service, and those opportunities are also available. And we have a contractor database, and we send out notifications to persons on those databases so that they can know opportunities, when opportunities come up, and they can bid on them. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in either being an investor or purchasing an FDIC asset pool or managing FDIC assets to make sure you check our website and get all the information you need so that you can actively participate. We are intentional about making sure that we have a huge number of participants and want to make sure that you have all the information so that we can move forward and these assets can move off the balance sheet of the government and into the hands of the private sector where we know they'll get the best execution.
So a couple of follow-up questions. Number one, can you be both an asset manager or register as both an asset manager and a purchaser?
Yes, you can, but you can't bid on the pool that you're managing.
That you're managing.
Yeah,
but you can be registered as both.
Register as both, yes.
Be, for instance, managing a pool and
You
then
can
bid on
manage
a
pool.
subsequent pool
That is correct.
that has come equity.
Yeah, you have the basic structure right. The percentages will vary based on the deal, and you may bid on the percentages, but essentially, I think that's an accurate
So
description.
round numbers, again, it always depends on how much the portfolio sells for, but with $20 million of equity, you could control, quote unquote, control $200 million of value.
I think that's right. I think what's important, and Don, who has experience in this, will tell you it's important to know how to bid, because being on the list and getting the information versus actually sitting down and filling out a bid, I think that is probably key to understanding, what are the factors that we use to analyze these bids, and what are the things that you need to consider when you're making a bid. It costs a lot of money for people to conduct due diligence, and you don't want to waste that money. So I would just say that we have a lot of information on our website. We just put out a video that has information on loan sales and also contracting opportunities. And I would take advantage of that information, but understanding how to make a bid, which Don has been successful in, I think is very important to the FDIC's process.
And so just to be clear about how esteemed this panel is, Don right now, I think, is the only minority investor that has participated in one of these auctions to date. Am I wrong on that?
You are wrong on that. Okay. He's probably the only one that's won, not participated.
Okay.
And
excuse me, my bad. Don is the only minority that has won a bid to date.
On a structured transaction.
On a structured transaction.
Now, we have ORE, we have all types of assets. So I'm just talking about structured transactions and asset sales and auctions. But our portfolio, again, we get the assets from the failed institutions, and we have a wide range of assets in our portfolio. And I would encourage those who are interested to get on our list so that you can see what we have available, and certainly bid on opportunities as they come up. You'll receive notice, but just get familiar with the bidding process and the auction process.
Okay, we got to move on. We can maybe have another follow-up session on that, but because we could talk all day about that stuff. Neelan, let me move on to you as the esteemed grand one on the panel here. You've been through all this, in theory. I mean, you went from your 30 million to your, what was it, 130 million to now almost 400 million? Did I get that right? Somewhere in there? 600 million. Please don't let me, he will come after me again. Talk to us about the capital raising environment right now, which is one of the things we haven't addressed so far. I mean, what are LPs and other investors looking for in this environment? And I would say, in general, what do we have to do better as minority investment managers to attract institutional capital or high net worth capital? How do we get started, and what's going on right now? Just a small question. It's just a small question.
Yeah. What I would say is it's a challenging environment. It's a very challenging environment because of the financial crisis. The assets of public pension funds, which are the largest investors in the alternative space, they don't have as much flexibility to invest. They don't have as much capital to invest. And so they're much more selective about the firms that they choose to commit capital to. The private equity business, for those of you all who don't know, is an extraordinarily lucrative profession. Essentially, and again, just going to give you some kind of round numbers here. You raise $100 million, you get to keep 2% of whatever you raise every year for 10 years. So they pay you $2 million a year.
And that 2% is holding right now in this market?
So far, yeah. But anyway, it's 2% per year for 10 years, and maybe it goes down to 1.5 after 5 years. But anyway, for simplicity's sake, it's $2 million a year. But that's not where the real wealth is created. The real wealth is created if you can take that $100 million, invest it in, let's say, 10 companies, 10 million each, and it's not easy, but you double that money. If you can double that money, so you make, you have an aggregate of 200 million. You pay the investors all their money back. So you give them $100 million back. You actually put up 1%, but you give them their 99% back. And then you have $100 million to split. They get to keep 80%. So they get to get $80 million, but you get to keep $20 million. That is how wealth creation is made in our business.
And that's called carried interest,
yes.
Which was a popular topic going back a few months, and then the first
Right.
fee, the $2 million, is the management fee.
Correct.
Keep going.
Right. So, it's a very compelling business, and interestingly enough, the capital that is raised is by and large the capital of people of color and women who are teachers, who are city employees, who are county and state employees. That's where all this money is. That's where all this money is, and it's disappointing, to say the least, that for the most part, our community does not have access to that capital. And it was a revelation to me. I used to practice medicine, okay? So, I was in a completely different world. I happened to serve on the board of Texas teachers and saw this phenomenon and said, time out. I got to do something about this. I need to figure this out. And so, when you see these companies being bought, Neiman Marcus, Avis, Hertz, all of those dollars are public pension fund, generally, the majority of public pension fund dollars. Your money, many of you all's money, or your mother's money, or your parents' money, siblings, what have you. That's where all that money comes from. It's not a bunch of rich people who write their own individual check. They have gotten wealthy by using the money of the city of Detroit, of the state of Louisiana, of the county of Shelby County in Memphis. I mean, that's where all this money comes from.
And Neelan, just to be,
Yes.
so CalPERS and CalSTRS, which is California State and California
Right.
Public Employees,
Right.
those are roughly $200 billion size institutional investors.
Each.
Each,
Yes. Yes.
sorry, each.
Yes.
And they are handing money out to you and expecting their 20% return. That's how you're
Precisely.
aggregating.
That's the game. So anyway, let me say, it's a challenging time to raise money, but there's also an opportunity to raise money. Look, part of what is necessary, and certainly Congressman Meeks has provided leadership in this regard, is increasingly public officials need to understand what's going on here and need to challenge trustees. They need to challenge people of color particularly, but to be trustees, because to manage their own money, but to be trustees, and these trustees to then hold the institutions accountable. That first and foremost, we want to generate the best returns, number one. But number two, we want to diversify our portfolio to lower risk as well as continue to generate returns. Again, it's a tough time to raise money, but it's also an opportunity. For me, we're raising, this new fund now, and we're raising money from public funds, from corporate funds, from Taft-Hartley funds, from high net worth individuals. Among our investment pool in the last fund, Verizon, Nokia, Raytheon, Walt Disney, John Deere, CalPERS, New York Common Fund, Credit Suisse, J.P. Morgan, Shelby County, Louisiana, a whole host of different institutions, Unite Here, the Union Pension Fund, Chicago Teachers. My point is, it's challenging, but there's a reward that comes with it. And the reward is the ability to create a platform, which is what we've tried to do, and generate great investments. Our strategy has been to invest principally in healthcare, as you might imagine. So about 50% in healthcare, 25% in business services, so financial services. We just bought an asset management company, about $45 billion in assets. It was the pension assets of American Airlines, their employees' assets, as well as other outside money, about half and half. But we now have a $45 billion platform that we're trying to grow to $100 billion. And we do opportunistic investments. So, there is great opportunity, and where we take it from here is global. it's don't think small. Think big. Don't think minority. Think where can you make the best risk return dollar. You do not have to limit it to urban markets. If you want to, great. That's great. I'm just saying we are virtually the only community that just thinks about investing in our own community. I'm just, you know, if you've got a great idea that can generate returns, people will give you money. And it doesn't have to be, you know, just in our community. So my goal, you know, I'll be in Asia next week for a week to 10 days, you know, and so whether it's the Chinese Sovereign Wealth Fund or the, you know, Kuwait Investment Authority or the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority or the Australian Investment Authority, you know, my role is to raise the capital, and then we deploy that in ways that, quite frankly, can impact our community. But, you know, at the end of the day, being able to generate great returns for our investors. Sorry, that was long.
No, that was great. Why don't I stop running my mouth for a second and open the floor up to questions. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask of anyone? Please, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kenzie. I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm a real estate broker. Can you talk about the short sale opportunity market that's out there in the real estate, particularly down on the commercial side? Because I'm starting to see, particularly in the Dallas area, we're starting to have a roll effect in the commercial real estate area where we're starting to now start seeing foreclosures there and the opportunities for short sales.
Michael, you might take this one, actually.
You start.
Well, I haven't really seen many short sales on the commercial side. I think right now what we're seeing is sort of the system is jammed up where the commercial mortgages are still being held on the bank's books. So I haven't actually seen the purging. I also haven't seen sort of where, you know, the maturities have happened and there needs to be sort of refinancing. And I think that, as Michael alluded to, I think we're probably a year or so away from probably the peak of where, you know, the commercial opportunity actually sort of hits.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally what you're seeing, all of those distressed assets, the $1 trillion+ in distressed assets that are potentially out there, fundamentally banks don't want to give those up. The way, and Sandra may have some commentary on this as well, but banks are right now trying to earn their way to healthier capital ratios. And if they sell bad assets at market clearing pricing right now, to some of the math that Don did at the beginning, something that was $100 in value in 2007 is now worth somewhere between $50 and $60 in value with a loan on it that's $70 to $80 in value. And if the bank has to sell that loan at a significant discount, that actually translates across its whole portfolio, and suddenly whether or not it is solvent or not is in question. And so a lot of banks right now are spending their time trying to earn as much money as they can to get themselves healthy, and as they earn money and get their capital ratios up, then they slowly sell off assets. Most people think that we're a little ways off from any sort of wholesale selling of large, higher quality assets. And you have some 6,000 small banks, more than that, you have some 8,000 small banks out there with asset or values of less than $10 billion, assets I should say, of less than $10 billion. Over 8,000 banks, but you know, those are the ones that are just kind of, I hate to say this, sorry in front of Sandra, but walking zombies right now. They can't do anything regardless of what they're saying, because if they sell, they're screwed. But they have the worst assets because they were kind of shut out of the market for lending by the securitization phenomenon that was going on at the peak. In other words, they couldn't compete with a conduit, a securitization. Given that you could borrow at 4% and they wanted you to borrow at 5%. So they were forced to go out and lend on land in ridiculous places. You can get that stuff. But whether or not that's coming back anytime in the next generation is kind of questionable. Whether you can get the best assets from the bigger banks, you know, they're kind of holding for right now. They've got big balance sheets, they can hide things, they can wait to grow out of it. There are a lot of tricks they can play. So you're starting to see it, but you're a ways off. Sorry, Sandra.
No, this is heresy to my ears here.
Uh-oh, this is good.
No,
No. You know, community banks are, and the large banks as well. The large banks have big securitization portfolios. They've got special servicers, and they're working those assets. And the community banks, I mean, these are community banks. We have been encouraging banks to work with these borrowers, and so they're doing some loan restructuring and loan modifications, and there's a lot of that going on. The nice thing about the community banks, from my perspective, is they know the borrowers and they really know, the ability to repay. So I think they're working through their issues. Banks tend to lag the economy. When we hear things are getting better in the economy, banks will take their time to work through their balance sheet issues. But we believe the community banks are a vibrant and vital part of this economy that we have, and we don't believe these big banks are playing tricks. We have examiners in the banks. The OCC is the primary federal regulator for a lot of large institutions, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, OTS. I mean, we've all worked together to try to make sure that there's some transparency and credibility in our system. We know there's reputational issues, but we are working diligently to ensure that there is stability in the financial sector, and that when people go to the bank to put their deposit in, which ultimately is used to make a loan, that they know that their money is in a safe and sound place. And we close those banks that are zombie banks, because we're required by law to close banks once their capital levels reach critically undercapitalized, which is 2%. So this is just for the record.
Thank you. Now, so of the 700 banks that are troubled banks on the troubled bank list right now, is that about right? Is it still 700, maybe a little less?
It's about 800 institutions on the troubled bank list, but many of the troubled institutions work their way through their problems. Most of the institutions on the troubled bank list don't fail. Again, last year there's 140 banks that failed, and so far this year there's 119. We probably will have more failures this year than we did last year, but we believe that in 2011 those numbers, there'll be some sort of return to normal, whatever the new norm is.
So the 800 banks that are on the troubled list this year, is it likely that it will be a different 800 banks next year, or is it possible that a troubled bank could just stay on the troubled list for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years?
No, it depends. I think that we have an excellent supervision program.
No doubt. I'm listening to you over here.
So we're hoping that banks move off the troubled bank list, but because it does take a while to work through these problems, and delinquent loans, whether they're commercial, residential, or otherwise, it goes back to something that was said earlier. I mean, unemployment, if you don't have a job, you can't pay back your loan, period. And so until all these things work together to contribute to the performance of the assets on the balance sheet, we believe that there ought to be some flexibilities in terms of these loan restructures and loan modifications, and these new loans ought to be based on the ability to repay, because we don't want a repeat of what happened before. I think that will it be the same 800? I hope not. Will the number be lower? I hope so. And we give a quarterly report on the status of the industry. We give the number of problem banks, number of failures, and I'm hoping that things will get better. We're starting to see a slowdown on the number of institutions that are going to be added to our problem institutions.
I will stop. I think that you had a question, the turquoise in the back? Lori.
She cited real estate as the principal path to wealth for African Americans. Do you not believe that investment in equities is also the vital path? For some of us, we have more wealth in equities than we have in our real estate, in our homes. And, especially between 95 and 2000 and 2003 and 2007, equity investment was great. So I'd like for you to address that, if you would, or any of the other panelists. What do you think of? I believe Ariel Investments did a study a few years ago saying that there's an African American aversion to investment in equities as opposed to real estate or life insurance or some of these other things. Could you please address that?
Well, I just told you about one investment club, and I have no aversion against investments into equities. I said that generally, home ownership is the first principal step of wealth creation. But equity investment is always wise. I have participated in some of that with other groups and have been very successful. It requires a lot of knowledge, research, and making sure you're expected trying to get the return that you want. But I'm for it.
Was there someone up front? Raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I'll get you next in the back.
I want to take us back to home retention, and if you could comment, or anyone else can comment on the intentional about home restructuring modification. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I happen to know a lot of people are falling to the foreclosure and at risk of losing their homes. So can you talk a little bit more about keeping the bank's feet to the fire when it comes to being deliberate about restructuring and modification?
Could everyone hear the question? Okay, so, and Tia, please tell me, the question is, could we go back to home retention and talk about keeping banks' feet to the fire in preventing foreclosures, delaying foreclosures, and allowing people to keep their homes? Is that so anyone want to take that on?
I'll start with that. As I mentioned before, we have a number of programs that we launched when we saw that the foreclosure crisis was upon us. Through our Making Home Affordable program, our Home Affordable Mortgage program, we have ways that we can do loan modifications. In fact, we've done, as I said, nearly $1.5 million loan modifications for families across the country. All of the major financial institutions are part of that program. The Big Four are part of that program. All the major servicers are part of that program. Clearly, that's not doing enough, and we are going to continue to hold, as you say, hold the bank's feet to the fire. We launched just earlier this year Hardest Hit Fund as part of that program. Up to this point, it's $14 billion for state housing finance agencies to work with directly with borrowers and servicers to restructure and modify their home mortgages. The latest round of that program, which we launched last month, focuses directly on unemployed homeowners, because that's where the biggest issue is for, as we all know, if you don't have a job, it's tough to keep making payments on your home. So we're going to continue to focus on that. The Department of Housing and Urban Development just launched $1 billion program that was part of the financial reform package to get at helping homeowners stay in their homes and modify their mortgages. You're going to continue to see us work at that issue. It's going to be, we're going to have to continue, as I said, to hold their feet to the fire. We can only get at a portion of the homes that are the homeowners that are going through problems themselves. But we're going to continue to do that. I know that the FDIC has also played a major role in that as well.
We have, and I would say that, especially for failed institutions, you have to be an institution to buy an institution. When part of the agreements that we require institutions to adhere to when they buy a bank or buy assets from us is that they'll participate in the loan modification program that our chairman was really adamant about early on in the crisis. We call it mod in a box, but it certainly follows the parameters of what now is the mortgage loan restructure program. So I think the mortgage restructuring is something that is just critical to ensuring that our communities remain vital. We do have consumer response hotlines and call centers, and if customers are having problems with their loan modifications that are being offered or not offered by an insured depository institution, then they can call the consumer response line, and we certainly can either send that to the agency that's responsible or take care of it ourselves. I might introduce Cassandra McConnell, who's an associate director, and she works on, she's in charge of all of our community affairs and our community development efforts at the FDIC, and she works on on foreclosure prevention, loan modification, and the like. And I have a number of other colleagues from the FDIC, and I don't want to call all your names, but if you stand, I just appreciate it because they know about all of these initiatives. But we do need to hold banks accountable. We can't hold them accountable unless we know about these issues. And if you call our call center, we're 1-877-ASK-FDIC. And again, each of the regulators have call centers where you can call and register complaints, whether it's about a home restructuring or a credit card issue. There are just people that are there, and then we follow up with the institutions.
Okay, we've got a couple of panelists, specifically Don and Sandra, that have to go. So I want to thank them. Say again?
If anyone had a question for me, I can.
Okay, so Sandra, do we want to let you go? I know that.
If anybody has questions.
Okay, does anyone? I see 4 questions in the room. I think let me go with you. Do you have a question for Sandra or Don? Okay, who has a question for Sandra or Don? I think you do. All right, in the back. You were next.
Past that.
But $26 million in sales, I'm not eligible for small business loans. I'm a small business, and we've asked to modify that tied to some other metric rather than to sales. Is there anything being done? That's the first question. The second question relates to the predatory practices of insurance companies tying our credit bureau to our premium, which in my industry, now I have people whose insurance is more than the car note. What is being done to stop these insurance companies from tying our credit report to our insurance premium, which is absolutely the most devastating thing, very sneaky. Nobody said anything. But it's devastating our community, particularly coming off the recession. That we know they were devastating, but now the credit scores are being tied to insurance premium. What's being done about that?
Well, I think a lot of the consumer issues, one, to the extent that they're happening in banks, banks are regulated entities, and you really have to communicate to the bank regulator, and the bank regulator will follow up on any predatory practice or anything that just isn't right. I think the new consumer agency that the Obama administration announced with the financial reform legislation is going to address many issues that pertain directly to consumers. That's true for banks, and it's also true for non-banks. That includes payday lenders. I believe the administration in the Dodd-Frank bill, it also provides for a national insurance commissioner, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the insurance companies are generally regulated on a state basis, and I believe that there is provision to have a national regulator in charge of some of the practices that take place at insurance companies. So I think the legislation will move the consumer protection issue down the court because consumers, for the most part, were harmed based on practices that took place inside and mostly outside of the financial insured depository institutions. There were a lot of non-bank entities that really took advantage of consumers, but I do think that the Dodd-Frank legislation and the new Consumer Bureau is expected to address a lot of these issues.
And let me just agree with everything she just said. That the legislation does provide for a director of insurance. We'll have that person and that office stood up very quickly. I can't give you a timeline, but it'll be very quick because we've heard that same issue all across the country, and believe me, I know what it feels like. I've been a small business owner, and so I've been in your shoes. On your first question, I'll just speak directly to the program that I've been talking about, the Small Business Lending Fund and the State Small Business Credit Initiative. We have the ability to direct through our regulatory, through the regulations and the guidance for the program, how we measure increases in small business lending. So we understand the point that you're making around sales. There are a wide range of metrics that may not be used currently in some of the lending programs. We understand that, so we're going to take a hard look at ways that we can change the way the measures of small business lending for financial institutions. But I hear you, and we're gonna work on that.
Okay, so what? I'll leave it to them. Do you guys want to answer one more, or do you have to go?
I can do it.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to follow up on what you just said about credit score and companies using that to speak up. Sorry. Hi. Just want to follow up because I work in a community of people who are really in despair as far as income and employment. Therefore, their credit score is not necessarily one that will allow them to get loans for whatever purpose they're looking to have the loan for. So, is there a way you, Treasury Department, working with big banks and other big companies, have some kind of power to give them to allow or to oblige banks to be able to use credit reports as a tool or one of the decision tools that they use, but less stringent on those scores, because a lot of people are getting loans, and because of the fact that the market's not good, the economy's not good. So.
I'm not going to punt it to my colleague here. I'll give you my answer. Part of the issue is that obviously banks can only lend based on a set of criteria so that they are operating with safe and standard practices that are established by the regulators. That said, part of the reason that we're so focused on getting capital to the financial institutions is so that they have the ability to lend to folks that don't fall within their normal credit box. We are working on a daily basis with large, small financial institutions to find ways that we can go beyond the credit score to, particularly as Sandra mentioned, with community banks who have those direct one-on-one relationships with borrowers. They can better understand whether or not that particular borrower can actually pay back, even if they have a credit score that's been dinged. So we're having conversations. I met with an association of state bankers today, and that was one of the things that we talked about. So we're going to continue to work on that, and I know that the regulators are also working at that as well.
I'm going to leave after this, but the FDIC launched a couple years ago a small dollar loan pilot where we wanted banks to make small dollar loans to people who might have credit issues and have challenges in terms of ability to repay, just kind of as an alternative to some of the payday lenders. And so we had a number of banks participate in that pilot, and we're hoping to expand that so that other banks can provide those types of services. We're trying to encourage people to come into the banking system, but we have to provide products and services that are easy to understand and that are affordable. And we do recognize that everybody doesn't have a perfect credit score. We have offered banks CRA credit to the extent that they participate in these small dollar loan programs that are targeted for low and moderate income communities.
And let me just add that we also, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, CDFI Fund, which provides financial support through grants and awards to CDFIs. Those CDFIs are some of the financial institutions that you all know and work with in communities around the country that has as part of their mission an aim of providing support to low and moderate income borrowers, particularly those that have been hardest hit during the crisis. So we're going to continue to push that, and in fact, the President has expanded the CDFI's budget in his latest proposed budget to $250 million. So we think that we're going to be able to do a lot through that program as well.
Just one quick follow-up.
Hey, Lori, why don't we let them go?
Okay.
and then you can.
Just to answer your question specifically, there is a thing in the industry called alternative credit. But basically, the consumer really has to make sure they do the work. It's those things that you use every day. It's your utilities. It's your cable bill. Those, what we call, they only report when you don't pay them. It's adverse reporting. So you actually have good credit with them until you do not pay them. Most people in our industry, we will allow you to build an alternative credit where we look at 12 months, 24 months. How have you paid your utilities? How have you paid your cable bill? How have you paid your insurance bill? Those are sources of alternative credit, factual ones. So you could try that.
Okay, way in the back, who's been patient here for 20 some odd minutes.
Yeah. What I would say, did everyone hear the question? Principally, it was, how do minority entrepreneurs prepare themselves
to attract
capital from private equity investors? Is that okay? Yes, ma'am. What? Okay. Anyway, most businesses are started out with friends and family as well as your own money, and that's historically how entrepreneurs capitalize their respective business. That's typically not the stage at which private equity intervenes. Again, as a company scales, there are different dimensions of private equity. So you have venture capitalists who invest earlier stage. Well, actually, they're angel investors, again, independent of friends and family, who invest in typically more earlier stage companies. And there are angel networks that you can try to access. There are venture capitalists who tend to invest in earlier stage companies relative to some of the other aspects of other types of private equity investors. So you have a range. You have the early stage, you have kind of the mid stage, growth equity, you have buyouts, you have mezzanine. That's kind of the span. Again, I think it depends on the type of company. I think it depends on the size of company. But at the end of the day, it depends on how well you've executed on the strategy that you have before you to demonstrate to whether it's the high net worth individual, whether it's the venture capitalist, whether it's the private equity investor who's doing buyouts or growth equity or whatever, that I have a track record of success over this period of time that has allowed me to grow my business, month over month, year over year, such that I, if given appropriate capital, I can take it to the next level. And so what the entrepreneur needs to do is have a very sound and very thoughtful business plan that he or she puts together with professional help or whatever, but that kind of articulates their vision of what it is they've accomplished and why, but also what they're looking to accomplish and how. And I think that really is that blueprint is what someone in my business is looking for. In addition to the document, though, it needs to be backed up with the facts. This is what I've done, this is how I've done it, and this is why. But like I said, articulating, what you want to do with the capital and, how you intend to execute on it. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think there was a question, lady in, is that purple? What color would I call that? Close enough? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, no, it's fine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we had a number of banks that were paying incredible bonuses, reaching dark money, and then went to the shareholders and asked them to take a cut in our shares to, so they can pay back the TARP so they can keep their bonus. 27% of shareholders, mainly small investor shareholders, said
No.
no. But the big asset managers voted with the bank to take away our money. So who's the asset manager, what duty does he have to those teachers and firemen and policemen who pay him?
Wish Don was still here.
Yeah. What I would say is this. You know, while small investors are important in terms of providing capital to corporations, it really is through other vehicles that they can have greater influence. And so these teachers and firemen and policemen, while their greatest influence is with the funds that they invest in. So it's, in my particular, Texas Teachers, where, you know, it has $100 billion in assets. And say, so your participation in the dialogue at that institution, you know, in terms of holding it accountable to represent you in the best possible way. You're no longer a small shareholder. You're a very big shareholder. And trust me, with $100 billion of Texas and $100 billion of $200 billion in CalPERS, or $100 billion in New York, aggregating that type of capital, those are really the principal shareholders of Fortune 500 companies in America. And so what I would say is, you know, as a Yep, it actually depends. In Texas's case, we manage generally most of the money ourselves. But I'm saying you're absolutely right. Some of those dollars are outsourced. But again, it's to the institution to hold the asset management firm accountable. Because if it's not representing it, then they should be fired. And so your voice should be heard, you know, within the system that you participate in. And that may, if you're not getting the appropriate response, then you should run for a trustee. Be a trustee in the fund. You know, because once you're a trustee, trust me, they're going to listen to your voice. And so what I would say is, again, that, look, people are going to do what is in their self-interest. People are going to do what's in their self-interest. And until you can demonstrate to them and enforce to them that it is not in their self-interest to take this, that, or the other, they're going to keep doing it. So, I mean, that's just the way of the world.
Just you know, one small follow-up on that. You know, the bigger the institution, those $200 billion institutions, those billion-dollar institutions, they are the more activist investors. They're really not going to, I mean, as Neelan just alluded to, they're not going to turn over their rights to anyone else to represent, and they're going to vote their pocketbook, what's in the best interest of their pensioners, in the case of Texas Teachers. The other thing, and this is a small thing, but something that everyone should keep in mind, if you have an account at Fidelity or Charles Schwab or, you know, wherever you have it, and you get a proxy statement, you know, they're asking you to sort of check the box, do one thing or the other, and if you don't check the box and that thing just goes in the garbage bin, then that means that institution has a right to vote however it sees fit to vote, or usually in the proxy statement itself, where a company's asking you to vote on something, they'll say, if you don't vote, we intend to vote in a certain way. And so, to Neelan's point about paying attention to what you're getting, you know, look at those things, figure out what you want to do. Doesn't always mean you're going to get it, but at least it's kind of like voting in an election, at least be heard. so that people know what the numbers were, so that that board, in this case, knows what the numbers were. Okay. You were next, I think.
My question is the first panelist.
Don? All the way down? Oh, Lori. Lori.
Okay, I didn't know which was first, okay.
Neelan.
Neelan.
Neelan, yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more to your transition from medicine to your current position? I remember you saying you were sitting on a board of a pension, and you had this aha moment.
Yes, well.
Speak a little bit more about how you made the transition.
Well, for me, again, I was very happy practicing medicine. Life was good, things were great, and I actually got involved in politics and really wanted to give back, get involved, but wanted to do it through raising capital, because while many people of color and women have certainly been involved in politics for a while, they had not necessarily been involved in writing checks and aggregating checks, and so I, along with a few friends, I had a good relationship with a guy named Bill Bradley, who was a senator out of New Jersey. I lived in Texas, met him, liked him, asked him to come down to Texas. Group of friends and I would raise some money for him. And I didn't know it at the time, but politicians love when you raise money for them. So, we created kind of a national network of friends who would support one another in their respective candidates. And so Bill Bradley was the first person. We did a deal for him in Dallas, and this was 1986. And then, my friends from Chicago who came down to the event in Dallas, they did a deal for him in Chicago. My friends in New York came down, they did it for him in New York. So, Bill became good friends. He's godfather of one of my kids. And then I got a call from Ann Richards, said, hey, look, forget this guy in New Jersey. I'm one from Governor of Texas. Will you help me? And, helped her. And then, Carol Moseley Braun and Harvey Gantt and, Ron Brown, the DNC. But ultimately, Ann said, I'm governor. What do you want to do? And I said, please, whatever you do, don't put me on anything to do with medicine. I know that. Put me with some interesting people. And so she put me on a tax policy committee to study whether Texas should have an income tax or not. And on it were a number of CEOs because they were very concerned about tax policy issues for the state. And I was working in the emergency room one day, and a guy named Don Williams called me and said, Neelan, I know you don't know me, but we're on this committee together. My name's Don Williams, and we both live in Dallas. The first meeting is in Austin, Texas. Do you want to just go down together? And I said, sure, what, Southwest Airlines flight are you on? And he said, no, meet me at my corporate jet, and we'll fly down together. And I got on the jet and said, I'm in the wrong business. And absolutely in the wrong business. I thought I was a doctor. I'm making more money than I ever thought I would make in my life. I'm a black doctor. Everybody loves me. I realized I had no juice. So I quit. That was it. I said, I gotta figure something else out. And that was it. So that's why, but I'm married, I got 6 kids, I can't just, I said I couldn't afford to go back, get an MBA, work on Wall Street. I said, I need to understand money. And so I asked the governor to put me on the board of the largest pool of money in the state, which was Texas Teachers. And I served on that board from 93 to 99. Looking at public equities, fixed income, real estate, which I chaired, and then private equity, which I fell in love with because that's where wealth was being created. And that was the only way I was going to get my plane. So I said, look, like most doctors, you make a good living. You spend even more because you figure I'm going to make it up the next time. And you get, houses and cars and tuitions and all. I said, in order to transition from medicine, I needed credibility outside of medicine, and I needed income outside of medicine. And I focused on corporate boards as a way to be able to do that. And so I said the first board I could be on, if I could be on any board in the world, it would be an airline board. For one reason and one reason only. They let you travel for free.
That's right.
So I didn't know anybody at American, but I lived in Dallas. And I was able to figure out, American actually had 3 boards. They had the airline, everybody knows about. They had Sabre, which was an information technology company, and they had a thing called AMR Investments, which is an asset management company at American Airlines. I was able to get on that board, gave my wife and I free first-class travel anywhere in the world American flew, and then the next board I focused on was hotels because they needed a place to stay. And there was a young company called Starwood Hotels, that I was, I was chairman of the real estate committee in Texas Teachers. I wanted to know about Starwood Hotel, so I arranged a meeting with the CEO, went up, talked to him.
This is Barry.
Barry Sternlicht. Barry's 37 years old. I said, Barry, I want to go on your board. He said, fine. So I went on board of Starwood Hotels, and then, the Gap. My kids needed clothes, and Burger King, because they needed food. I mean, that was really the platform that kind of allowed me to then have the leverage to raise capital. And again, Texas Teachers for me was my MBA. It was my learning laboratory to kind of understand not only how money worked from an academic sense, but how leverage worked from a power sense. And look, as a very, very, very good Jewish friend of mine said, he said, look, different people look at things differently, but in my community, look, if I sell you, if I sell you a bad car, a terrible suit, or whatever, is that my fault or is that your fault for not understanding that? And so we have to put ourselves in positions where we control and influence and have leverage in order to cut the best possible deal. And so for me, serving on these boards has created a global network of relationships so that when I go to Asia next week, I have a network of relationships there or with these different things. And it allows me to trade favors because in business, it's a lot about relationships and trading favors. And so, and at the end of the day, money talks. And, whether it's the right thing to do and you should do this because it's just, look, I got the money, and it's just a different conversation. Yeah. And unfortunately, historically, we have tended, and I'm not saying that our moral compass is incorrect. I'm just saying different people have different moral compasses. And just because you think saving all the babies in Harlem is the right thing to do, somebody else is like, that's not my ticket. That's what you think it is? Great. But don't ask me for money. You make the money, and then you do it. And I think that's what we should be about. If we want to improve our community, the most successful people, and I raise a lot of money, but the best way to raise money is to be able to write a check yourself. You got to first write a check yourself. Because once you can write a check yourself, then you have the credibility to say, okay, I've written the check. Now, you to write a check, and you to write a check, and you to write a check. That's how it works.
It's the first thing investors will ask you, by the way. How much of your own money are you putting in? By the way, did you get the jet? Neela, did you get the jet?
Pardon me, what?
Did you get the jet?
No, I haven't. Well, I'm still on board of American. I bought the asset management company, so I still get the free first cover, and I'm working on the jet. Trust me, I am working on the jet. You have no idea.
Okay. One last question. Actually, before that question, I've been asked to ask how many people in here are in the venture capital business? One, how many people in here are in the investment banking business? One, how many people are in the insurance business? I see a trend. How many people are in real estate? There we go. Hope that answers the person's question. Last question. Gray suit.
Well, again, I think, first off, again, I don't know you, but I think you need to have the appropriate academic credentials, in terms of, where you've gone to college or graduate school. I think you need to do that. I think you need to be involved with institutions that have a good track record of success in private equity and have a good reputation in private equity, and those things aren't necessarily the same. You know, you can be very successful, not to have a good reputation, but finding the right cultural fit for you that kind of makes sense. Private equity is a very tough business to get in. You know, you can have great grades, you can have this. It's about relationships. One of the things, again, we have to understand, you know, sometimes it's racism. Sometimes it's just, look, this is my neighbor. This is my cousin. This is my friend of a friend. And so it's not that I don't like you. I just don't know you. I just don't know you. We aren't in the same church. We don't go to the same golf club. We don't know, you know. And so it's not that. And so putting yourself in positions where you can demonstrate your value add, because it's not enough to be a diverse candidate. The question is, how can you make me money that I would ordinarily not make? So, you know, it really is about, you know, what I have is a unique set of relationships, quite frankly, that you don't have or, you know, can't have. It's about, you know, I have certain analytical skills that, you know, I can bring to the table. I have the ability to access capital that you would. I have the ability to access deal flow that you don't have. So it's packaging oneself in a way that allows him or her to be of value. And that's, you know, that's really how one does it. It is not easy, but having said that, it can be done. And again, one of the things that, you know, I've tried to encourage, and again, Congressman Meeks and others have been important in terms of leadership is, again, this money emanates from big public funds, most of whom's money are, you know, people of color and women. And so there needs to be pressure from the institutions who give them the checks that, look, we're not giving you a check unless you, where are your people of color? Where are your women? What's happening? You know, we have to, we don't necessarily leverage what we really have. We don't recognize it, first off. We don't recognize what we have, and therefore we get taken advantage of in situations. And so, you know, whose fault is that? I mean, at some level, we need to understand how the game is played and play it hard and play to win.
That's right.